You are listening to 10,000 Swamp Leaders, leadership conversations that explore adapting and thriving in a complex world with Rick Torsett and guests.
Hi, everybody. This is Rick Torsett, and welcome to 10,000 Swamp Leaders. This is the podcast where we have conversations with people who've made some decisions to lead on some difficult challenges. Oftentimes, one of the decisions they make to lead is how they want to choose to use themselves in the world going forward. And today's conversation with a good friend of mine is in that category. Today, it's really cool, Lianne, to have you on. Lianne Morgan is my guest. I'm going to bring her in here quickly, and then we'll give you a little background on who Lianne is, how I come to know her. So, Lianne, welcome to 10,000 Swamp Leaders. It's very good to have you here.
Thank you, Rick. Thanks so much for having me.
So let me give a brief context on the introduction here. So I was trying to recollect yesterday when I was getting prepared when we first met. And I remembered that we met because of a certain age. Most adults meet other adults through their kids. And that's how our connection started. Our daughters played soccer together. You willingly volunteered your husband to be an assistant soccer coach for me, which was great because he's Welsh and he actually knew something about soccer and I didn't. And from that point on, while our daughters went their separate ways over the years, we have not gone our separate ways between Teresa and I and you and Toby. So that is not, for our listeners, a good enough reason probably to do a podcast, but it's a start. But there is a more important reason here. So I want to give you a little space here to tell people a little about who you are, and then I'll take it from there. So what do you want people to know about you?
When I was about 6 years old, I remember walking to school and stopping on the sidewalk and looking up at the sky and asking in that childlike sort of exasperated way, as like when you're mimicking adults, what is time? And what is this crazy, crazy notion of time that these adults talk about? And I think in some ways I've been asking those types of esoteric questions ever since. And so, you can contrast that with 3.5 decades where I was a marketer in the corporate world, which, something in me finds a little ironic because marketers spin meaning all the time, right? And esoteric questions eventually remove all meaning so you can see things as they are. But anyway, after a long career in the corporate world, I'm now coaching and teaching mindfulness. And I guess you could say it's interesting that your podcast is 10,000 Swamp Leaders, and in trying to sort of look at the relationship of what I'm doing to your podcast, I guess I could say I help people navigate the swamp within. And in some ways, mindfulness and the healing arts have been practices that have run parallel to my career. And they've been a study and a practice for me for a really long time. And I think something in me has always seen the suffering in people in our society. And what I've learned or come to see is that that suffering comes from a place of constriction, the black and white, the either or, the right or wrong, limited thinking of our ordinary minds, the small self. And I think I help people. I would say I'm sort of a gardener of space. So trying to find that spaciousness that can hold all of these contradictions to ease tension, anxiety, and also help them weed out, some of the garden variety violence that lives in all of us to the name of judgment or trying to fix other people or people pleasing and, things like that. So our society is great at conditioning for and rewarding constriction in many cases, but rarely do we take the time to teach and learn how to deliberately cultivate space, where we can pause before we respond, where we can see the many shades of gray between that black and white. And quite frankly, where something new can appear, where creativity and innovation and new things come in, because those things come from the unknown. And yet space and spaciousness, are the very doorway also to peace. So using mindfulness and compassionate inquiry, I help people create a sense of inner spaciousness so that they too can become the doorway, I'll say, to peace in themselves and with others.
Okay, nice introduction. Let me say a few things from my perspective about my experience with you. I thought about this ever since we arranged the time for this podcast recording. And I thought, so how does Lianne show up for me? Now, oftentimes my guests are not able to do this sort of reflective piece because I don't know them very well, other than the reason they're on the podcast. But this is not the case for you and I. And I thought, well, there's a few things that come to mind. First of all, you are one of the most curious people that I've met in terms of always just sort of wondering, sort of like the 5-year-old on the way to school. That does, for me, in my experience of you, that's never changed. There's always a curiosity and a question and a probing about whatever it is that's in front of you. And that's hard to find these days with people of a certain age. You're incredibly creative in every way, shape, or form. You have sense of color, sense of space. You design things. You're a great cook. You're an artist in many ways. So when you announced this transition, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, I thought, I sure hope it's got something to do with the creative side of life, because that part needs to be in the world. And I'm glad to see it is. And the last thing I put down, and you probably will like this, I may need to explain this to some listeners here, but I have a friend who's a Jewish Buddhist, which is an odd combination. And Joel Levy is his name. He lives in Seattle. He one day told me, we were talking about something about some individual, and he says, "Oh, well, she has one foot in the other world." And I thought, oh, that is such a brilliant characterization of people who have chosen to sort of break the form of living in the mechanistic, mechanical world full time and plant themselves at least partially in this other world. And so I've always thought you were that way already. And I think the work you're doing now, we're going to find out in the conversation, is an opportunity and a platform to express that foot in that other world, if you don't mind me saying that. But first, before we get to who you are now, people who listen to this podcast know that originally I started it for two reasons. One is to talk to people who've made a decision to lead in some very difficult situations that are somewhat immune to quick fixes, swamp issues. And then the second reason was that I expected that there'd be younger people on this leadership journey on the trail behind, and these would be, quote, elder conversations for the future generations to come, which is a nice idea. And I think it's now about 50% plausible after my daughter straightened me out and said, Dad, there's a lot of people of my age who are doing pretty good at leading too, and maybe you should talk to some of them. She was right. And I followed her advice, and I've had several people of a certain age that she could relate to on, and I've learned a lot from them. But there's a third reason too that's emerged, which I didn't plan on. And this sort of shows up, I think, in your situation, which is I believe leading is a choice and an activity, and it's not a position, it's not a role, and it can come from anywhere. The hardest place sometimes for it to come from is for a person to raise their own hand and choose to lead their own life vastly different than the way they've been leading it heretofore. And you have a long career in corporate world, and you made a choice to leave corporate world and travel this road. And you sent me an email. And you said, this is the email I sent to my team. I hope it's okay to read this. You said, the courage to act on voice inside me showed up this year. That courage disturbed that part of me that settles for something safe, comfortable, and known. So, Lianne, I think you're giving voice and words to a place that many people find themselves in. So I want to start here with what provoked that voice finally. And what did you do with it? And how did you manage and facilitate your own process to go from this safe corporate space that you knew a lot about to this thing you're stepping into? Talk to people about this, because I think this is a useful place where a lot of people find themselves.
What I found, Rick, is that I believe in living a life in question to the degree that we can. And I think everything's on a scale in life in some ways. And so, how can we raise the quality of questions that we're asking ourselves? And for a long time, there was a felt sense of boredom with work. It felt like the work life was on repeat, and which is normal, right? We go around that merry-go-round. But there was a question, right? So all of those felt senses were a question or clues that something was arising. And as I worked through that process, the bigger questions started to emerge. How do I want to actually be of service in the last part of my life? What is it that I want to contribute that has some degree of sustainability to it? And I've always, like I talked about in the opening, I've always paid attention to human potential. And that's just been an area of fascination for me. And so all of these clues were emerging. And I think the email points to the fact that the preparation had been done. And oftentimes, our mind thinks that it's orchestrating everything, what I'm feeling, where I'm going, what I'm going to do next, what I want to be 30 years from now. And what I can say is I came to a place where I found that wasn't actually true, that when we look at life as a teacher, that it's our being that attracts our life in many ways. And so by the time that we start asking these questions, the game is afoot in some ways. And so how do we clear, and that was my work, was clearing enough of the mind BS, if you will, to be able to clearly see when it was time to go, understand the internal work that needed to be done, creating a sort of centeredness, something that could be present in the moment and see things as they were without all of the stories around it. And that it led me to a point where there was a natural point of departure with the company that I was at. And, that departure was met with just an incredible generosity and kindness. And it was very compassionate in many ways, which I think in some ways is hard to find sometimes in the corporate world. But I would say we don't often know what we're preparing for. And so we'd like to be able to say it's a 10-step plan and here's what we do. And there's some aspects of that are legitimate. But can I clear enough of the mind work to be able to see things as they are and have that felt sense, that impulse that arises out of awareness, as opposed to a doingness where I'm pushing and resisting and trying to get things done, as opposed to doing that arises out of a knowing, out of an awareness that's there and sort of taps you on the shoulder. And it's like, okay, it's time. We're ready.
I imagine some people listening are asking, well, you're on that side of it now, and I'm in that place you were describing back there. I'm behind you. So to that kind of wonder, can you provide some detail, I guess, about what you actually went through as you traverse from there to this place? Did you have a practice? Did you do certain things? Did luck play a hand? Fortunate relationships? What sort of sustained you on this transition from that to where you are now?
I think that the hardest thing to confront was the fear that my mind, and I think many minds have, about the unknown. And our mind is constantly searching for a sense of assuredness, to know the answer, to know that things are going to be okay. And my practice of mindfulness, if we sort of look at the four aspects of mindfulness, the first thing is, can I see things as they are? So when it rains, the sidewalk gets wet, which is a quote by a mystic named Gurdjieff. But so often when we say, oh, when it rains, the sidewalk gets wet, and oh, bummer, I can't go boating today, and I can't do this, and it turns into a series of complaint. And can I just see things as they are? When it rains, the sidewalk gets wet. So I had to learn to see myself as I was, and to confront and be with, and to learn to be compassionate with that part of me that was uncomfortable with the unknown. The second sort of aspect of mindfulness is being in the present moment, and the present moment is the point of power. And we often find our minds racing. And, there was a point that this was very active for me in my career of, oh my gosh, I've got it. How much longer do I have to do this? Just on and on and on and on and on. Again, the merry-go-reel of thought. But in the present moment, if I am truly present, you can wake up in the morning and say, yes, I'm going to work today. I'm still employed. And so I'm doing this. And there's going to be a point at which some conversation arises, some set of conditions and circumstances arises, and then I'll have a choice. But that wasn't there yet. So again, the point of power is always in the present moment. And our minds like to run ahead when we're contemplating change. And, well, how can we make this happen? And when will this time be? And I wonder what will happen when. And so the third aspect of mindfulness is this idea of noticing that things change all the time. And so with corporations, things are, and in business, it's changing all of the time. So how could we possibly know or plan for, outside of having our own plan and saying, I'm going to leave on this particular day? But it's just, can I be with circumstances and see them unfold? And that served me in my departure incredibly well. I met with some very fortuitous circumstances. And then the last thing is, can I have a non-judgmental awareness of what's happening around me? And can I see what I'm judging in this process? And when I can see what I'm judging, then I can determine and use discernment about whether or not how I want to use the information that's in front of me, or, what the mind might think is happening. And so for me, the practice was really putting everything that I had learned to use in mindfulness, put it in use around this question of when to leave the corporate world, and to be able to see the trickery of the mind and how the past creates a future. And yet when we're in the present moment, that past doesn't exist and that future doesn't exist. So how can I be with whatever question is arising in me, and whatever emotions and whatever thoughts and sensations and, whatever that are informing the moment?
So I think this is probably going to inform a bunch of the conversation we're going to have here in the next few minutes, but I want you to talk a little bit about, because you held a fairly significant role in an organization. There's a lot of people that were under your leadership. And so, and you've been in that kind of conversation, as you say, for a very long time. So when you actually departed, when you actually left, when you actually woke up that first morning without having to go there, how did it hold up? You've got this practice, you've been working through these things, but when you woke up and you're suddenly not going there, and you were, for the moment, a free agent, what was that like? Do you remember?
Yeah, it's so funny. A lot of people have asked me that question. And in some ways, again, the mind sort of expects there to be some great relief, or, it projects into the future. And it was like, I woke up just like I do every morning. I climbed out of bed just like I do every morning. I had a cup of coffee just like I do every morning. I had my meditation sitting just like I do every morning. So again, when we're in the moment, life's pretty simple. And so my mind had a story. It's just, I remind myself of this all the time because it's so obvious and so poignant. But my mind had a story when it left corporate America of, oh my gosh, we're going to take 6 months off and we're going to have all of this time and just do what we want and blah, 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 as the mind does. And when I sent out that email that you read and sort of announced that I was going to become a coach and a mindfulness teacher, I had several people sign up. And so I left one day and literally the next day started coaching. And so we see the mind projects all this stuff into the future, and very little of it was true at all. And so when I woke up the next day, I had started and opened my coaching practice.
So brilliant. I love that. Okay, so you've just provided the segue. So the transition was relatively quick. So let's go. So you know this is coming. You know you're leaving. You know all the stuff. So what was it that? What were the influences, or what provoked you to decide, when I do make this move, I'm going to be a mindfulness coach? What gave you a sense of form and purpose around that?
I think it's something that's been whispering to me for a really, really long time. And I've been incredibly fortunate from, I guess it was my 30s when I became the CEO of a small marketing agency, that conditions were such that I was introduced to mindfulness teachers and healers and things like that. And so I'm walking this one sidewalk in life that's all about business. And, I had a lot of ambition throughout my career. And there was a tremendous amount of what I'll call needless striving, just doing, 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 doing. But on this other sidewalk were the healing arts and, learning about mindfulness and putting some of those practices in place. Again, everything on a scale. So I didn't have a lot of facility with it in my 30s. But there was something there that would walk between these two lanes, if you will. And I guess it was in my 40s or so, I thought, wow, I'd really like to be a coach. I'd like to work with people in the way that these teachers and these coaches have worked with me. And again, they had opened up questions, and I started learning the power of the question. And it just it took the time that it took to get to the place where I feel like I have facility and some providence to help others that are trying to develop the centeredness and the place to come home to in themselves, where, we're all tickled by the external world, but I have to have that place inside myself. That inner landscape is often underdeveloped in folks, which is not a surprise when we look at the conditioning, of our society. And so I had to build my own place to come home to in order to help others develop that place inside of themselves.
So I wrote down here, come home to. So you said it 3 times here, I think. So what is that? I mean, when you say you had to do that, what did you do there?
It's a practice, I would say, first of all, of quieting the mind and truly being able to take a step back from the stories that the mind tells and getting to the root cause of the stories that we tell ourselves, our behaviors in life, our attitude towards others. And it really is a process of seeing life as teacher, which is something that I learned. I would say there was something in me that really understood life as teacher I think in my 30s. And so every time there was friction, every time there was an unpleasant emotion that arose, I was clear that it was a mirror for something in me. And so throughout life, running down and reconciling those mirrors, all of those frictions in life, helps us see ourselves as we are. It reduces the load that we carry, where we leak energy everywhere because we're hooked by the political landscape or the organizational hierarchy that we find ourselves in, or who's getting promoted and not, and gossip, and all of these things are ways that we leak energy. And a lot of it is because we don't actually understand who we are and how we function. And so a big, big part of my work, and it's a work that takes years for most people, is being willing to look at any grievance that we have and searching for that place inside of us and getting to the root of it. Because when we can see ourselves more as we are, we clear up, we start building that inner space, but we clear up a lot of the unnecessary suffering, I'll call it, that we have with the external world.
To the point you're just making here, there's a lot of dragging of ancient grievances, sort of metaphorically in boxes or rocks or something that we carry with us every place we go. So I'm interested then, you've written around your what I called coaching offers, but that's probably not the right term, but you have a couple in here that are pretty interesting to me. So you have cultivating well-being, mindfulness, best stress reduction. I can get my head around those rather easily. But you have some provocative ones in here, at least for me. And I'd like for you to speak a little bit, getting into relationship with conditions that cause anxiety. So maybe that's just a little bit of what you said, but let's put a sharper point on it. That's got a directive course of action that I might ping you and say, yeah, I want to get in relationship with the conditions that cause me anxiety. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. Oftentimes, we're 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 layer cakes, right? And so when I was in marketing, it was a sort of business development type of role. And so I was always responsible for, going to pipeline meetings, right, where we're reporting on how sales are going. And in some cases, those meetings were incredibly rigorous. There could be shaming that happened in front of your peers, or things that felt like shaming, where people are trying to press buttons that were deeply uncomfortable. And you could feel it in the air on these calls as everybody sat and, went round robin on these things and were quizzed on where deals stood and things like that. And getting into relationship with friction, we're often triggered. Old things in us are triggered, to your point about what we haul around behind us. Getting in touch with that in a compassionate way. So often what we don't want to do is feel that discomfort, that deep anxiety that emerges in a situation like that. So how do we be compassionate, and instead of turning away from it and trying to push it away, let me just get through this call. Let me go home and have a drink. Let me go gossip in the hallway with my friends about how horrible that call was, or, whatever it is, we push it away. What we learn in mindfulness is to approach that aspect of ourself, whatever it is that was producing the anxiety, in a very compassionate way. And so, can I recognize it? And can I just be with and acknowledge, okay, there's a part of me that feels really whatever, anxious, shamed, less than, whatever. I see the thought that's like, wow, if I don't get this deal closed, XYZ might happen. So there's just a recognition, and then there's an allowing. And so, can I allow that thought to be there instead of pushing it away? Can I get curious about it and investigate it very lightly, right? So what's here? What does this part of me, which is probably a pretty small part, right, want? What does it need right now? And what does it believe? Oh, it believes I'm not good enough, or I'm not worthy, or whatever, right? So it's almost like we're in conversation with this part of us that has this feeling, emotion, thought, whatever it is. And we're just learning more about it and learning more about it and leaning into it and leaning into it, until we're sort of at the root. And it's likely with things that we really feel and we felt for a long time, that it's going to take several times of working with that and just sitting with that part and talking to it, right? And then what does it need? Because it needs something. That's actually a part of us that needs some type of nurturance. Does it need to feel held? Do I need to put my hand on my heart? Do I need to give myself a hug? Do I need somebody else to tell me it's going to be okay? And who might that be in my mind that I can imagine is telling me it's going to be okay? So that process of recognizing, allowing, investigating, and nurturing is a really healthy way of coming to know ourselves. And what we find is if we can sit in that discomfort as often as we need to, that our presence to those parts will loosen, right? Because it's a place of constriction in us, and it'll loosen and dissolve in our presence. So often we look outside ourselves for that, but it's in us.
I had a conversation just last week, and somehow I'm making a connection here. Maybe there's not one here, but let's see. In this case, the approach to this kind of dynamic in an organizational setting, which is where you can get some pretty weird, aberrant behavior, as we know. And I think it's worth noting for everybody to remind us all that organizations are weird in that we tend to spend more waking hours there than we do with our families. And we do that for years. And that in itself should tell us something's off. But that's another issue. But what you're saying, Lianne, brings me back to this sort of other angle in diagnostic angle, which is family of origin issues. Meaning that if in a family dynamic growing up as a child, if there was a lot of tension, we develop resources to survive that tension. And it's no surprise that those would be the things we fall back on as adults in a similar conflict situation in an organization. I'm 68 and I'm acting like a 9-year-old. The 9-year-old that used to do this when mom and dad got into a big knuffle. This was my strategy to survive, get out of it, avoid it, go hide. So that's a starting point for understanding it, but it doesn't alleviate it necessarily. Awareness doesn't actually build me competence. But what you're talking about is a possible way in which to actually build an alternative response, mental, emotional muscle, fortitude, something that allows me to catch myself earlier in those situations somewhere in the future. I got to work this practice over time, but I can lessen the potency of it, the length of it, the pain of it, by having a deliberate practice that is oriented around these kinds of provocations that I know are historically embedded in me. Is that a fair reflection?
That's exactly it, Rick. And so often, again, we turn away from it, right? Because we just don't want to sit in that unpleasant place. I promise that cultivating a practice like that is the way that we come to know ourselves. So much of the needless negativity that those states create, where we haven't looked deeply enough in ourselves, fall away. And it's a deeply, deeply rewarding practice. And what we find is we ultimately become more comfortable sitting in the unknown, that we can see wonder in people and look at them with fresh eyes. We're much more empathetic because what we feel in ourselves when that anxiety or tension or whatever comes up, we begin to understand that exists in everyone. And so it gives me more patience in working with others. It's like, oh yeah, I see that in me too. Okay, we can just move past. I don't need to engage with that part of you. So it's a deeply rewarding practice. And when we get to know ourselves in that way, it is profound, the space and the energy that we get back.
I'm going to even say, I was going to say speculate, but I think it's doing that work also then gains agency and access to some long forgotten gift, talent, or capacity that never got utilized because there was always a retreat going on to avoid the other thing. So there's a healing component, and then there's a revealing component of access to something that's always been there, but never got deployed or didn't get deployed often enough. That makes a huge difference. I mean, that's my experience. I don't know how it is for you, but that's I guess it falls into the space that you coach, I coach. Oftentimes people show up in these conversations initially because they've determined there's something wrong with them. And if I can just fix the wrongness, life will be better. And the abandonment of any kind of review of what are the unused gifts, talents, and potentials that we should also be engaging with in this coaching process is an unnatural act for most people because they're so pejoratively oriented to what's wrong with them. Generally speaking, that's not true for everybody. Any thoughts on that?
No, I couldn't agree more. And I think, so often in our work, what we're really trying to get to is the next innovation, the space for real creativity, and how do we really solve, our clients' challenges? How do we build innovative new products? And that space is most clearly accessed when we're out of the way. And right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and anything new, any new innovation comes from the unknown, but we're so busy covering up, right? And we're so afraid of the unknown that no wonder it's so hard to innovate or see our way through to new social structures and things like that, because we have all of these structures that have imprisoned our innovations and our creativity and things like that, to your point.
Yep. Okay, so I can imagine listeners saying, that's all good, but Rick, you're not asking Lianne the questions I have about me. So I will remind people that we'll put information in the show notes that you can actually track down Lianne and engage her in a conversation on the specifics of the things you're thinking about that may be coming up in this conversation. I would like to, this is called 10,000 Swamp Leaders. And I'd like to just add a piece here because I'd be neglectful to the purpose of the podcast if I didn't ask you, as somebody who chose to lead for a very long time in a very significant size organization, what is leading to you? And what have you learned about yourself and about how to lead that could also be useful for people because they're still living in those spaces and they're looking for ways to navigate that choice of leading?
Rick, I have a hard time getting past your definition of leading, that it's actually a choice and that it's not a position that we're given, although we might be promoted into a new level, a new scale of leadership. I think the qualities of leading, and this isn't exactly answering your question, but if I look at the qualities of a leader who knows themselves, in my opinion, and from what I've seen, is going to be a much more effective leader because they've moved a lot of their stuff out of the way so that they can see what is in the landscape. They're deeper listeners, so they can hear what's not being said. Oftentimes, at least when I was leading, was the more valuable part of the conversation, which is kind of a paradox. But if I'm sitting in front of somebody who's really stressed out about something, it was often what wasn't being said that was much more informative than what was actually coming out of the person's mouth. And so I think great leaders lead with empathy. They have deep listening skills and can sort of sort through what right action is in extraordinarily complex situations, and that they lead with questions as opposed to answers.
As opposed to answers, I agree. And it's a useful distinction you're raising about what I'm saying. Expand on that a little bit as an orientation point for listeners, which is that perspective is the perspective of Kennedy School's adaptive leadership program. And they're making a distinction between authority in the organization, i.e., The organizational chart is a map of authority, position authority, not necessarily leadership, because we've all been in an organization where something came up for leaders. We look up to those and they don't meet the moment. So I think their astuteness is to say they're not the same. If we can put them together, then something cool can happen where proper use of authority and proper use of the attributes that you just described are put together. So I left that part out of the distinction, which oftentimes is the problem in the first place because people don't make those distinctions. So that's my clarification there. All right. So there's a lot of ground in this topic, and there's no chance that I was able to figure out all the things I should ask you. So what is it I'm not asking you about this work that you're doing that you think is important for people to understand what you're trying to do?
For me, the journey of mindfulness has been about relationship and bringing relationship to things. And so often we think of relationship as person to person. And yet, often what I found is we need to look much deeper to understand relationships. So, is my mind in relationship with my body, for example? Am I in relationship with my feelings and my emotions? What is my relationship to the questions that I'm asking? For me, everything in mindfulness comes back to the question of, am I in relationship, and what's not in relationship in this moment? So I would say asking, ourselves that question whenever we feel that friction. What's not in relationship right now? When we do feel that joy and wonder, it's like, wow, what in me is in relationship right now? So maybe that answers your question.
But I think it's an important piece to the conversation you're having here. I'm of an opinion that relationships are primary and everything's derivative of that, but I hadn't quite linked it to every part of me that I could be in relationship, and how am I doing with that? What parts do I neglect? Or I'm sure in my case, there's parts I don't even know. So if that's the case, how do I get in contact and connected to those parts?
I think it's again through the study of ourselves. And what's my question right now? What's been grabbing my attention? What type of reading and articles and books? What kind of music? Like what's alive is one way of approaching the question. What's alive for me right now? What seems to be appearing in my field of awareness? And I think another question is what's activated in me right now? And so that's more leaning into the friction side of things. What's bugging me? Where do I allow myself to be bugged? And both of those places can be generative places for exploring what's in relationship, and then making sure I'm dropping into my body when I explore that, right? And what are the sensations that come up? Where do those questions and those frictions or that aliveness exist in my body? And what do they feel like? And what are those sensations telling me?
Okay, it's a good distinction making. I want to explore it, because for some people, the phrase "check in with my body" may not have a relationship with that. So what are you saying there? What does the body offer us in your experience around information and answering questions and providing data, or however you want to say it, that makes it essential that we stay in touch with it?
Yeah. Oftentimes what we don't realize is, our body and our emotions are in time. They're here, they're present. That's why the body is so important in mindfulness practice, because it's the thing that's rooted in the present moment. Our mind is always the last thing to the table. So we think that the mind is orchestrating all of this, and it's not. The body is here. Our emotions react very quickly to what's around us. And then the mind comes in and makes up the story to create continuity. And so dropping into the body is important because it's what's here right now. And it often has information for us. The issue is getting in relationship with the body. And this is why, for me, a meditation practice is really important, and being with the breath and feeling the breath in the body. And then eventually, when I've got that, I can work with slowing the mind, which is when I'm in relationship with my body, my mind doesn't run as quickly. And so, again, it's a practice of stages, and there are all sorts of different types of meditation practices that, aren't sitting in quiet all day long, right? That can happen in the space of 5, 10, 15 minutes. But it's a practice getting our mental center, our emotional center, the heart, and the body into alignment so that I can see the entire cockpit and have some providence with it so that I get choice.
It's a good metaphor of the cockpit. And I like that distinction you're making, that the body is the part that's fully present right now, meaning we've all had experiences where we can't cognitively explain something, but we can sure feel it in our body, whether it's joy or fear or anxiety or whatever. Okay, fair enough. All right, so what's ahead for you? Last question.
I'm just getting ready to actually teach some beginning mindfulness classes and meditation courses come in this spring, and continuing my coaching practice and seeing where it goes.
Okay. So for everybody listening, you know it's coming in the spring, so we will provide the information in the show notes where you can get a hold of Lianne. I assume they could get a hold of you if they wanted to, and you could explain to them what different ways in which you might be able to be of help to them. Is that fair?
That's fair.
All right. So I want to thank you, Lianne, for being on the podcast. For those of you who are listening, you should know that in a week or so, Lianne and her husband and me and my wife and my sister and brother-in-law are gathering to have a big cannelloni dinner, which Lianne is going to lead on. So besides being a mindfulness instructor, she's an incredible chef. So I look forward to that gathering, and we will not broadcast live from the Morgan kitchen on cannelloni. We'll keep that to ourselves. Thank you very much for coming on to the Swamp.
Thank you so much, Rick. It's a great conversation.
Thank you for listening to 10,000 Swamp Leaders with Rick Torsett. Please take this moment and hit subscribe to follow more Leadership Swamp conversations.